Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Cooper Hoffman and David Johnson lead the pack in a Stephen King adaptation that'll keep you on your toes, The Long Walk. Set in a dystopian America, every year The Long Walk is held, led by Mark Hamill's The Major, and broadcast to boost morale, with 50 teenage boys chosen from every state to compete for a cash prize and a wish at their choosing. This year it takes place in Maine, and the hometown hero is Raymond Garrity, played by Cooper Hoffman, who holds a personal reason for joining the contest. The rules are as simple as they are brutal. Participants must keep pace above 3 miles per hour, and if they don't, they will be executed after 3 warnings, and the walk will continue until only one is left standing. The Long Walk is based on the Stephen King novel, the first one he ever wrote in the mid-60s, but not the first one published. The book was so bleak that it took several years for it to be finally published in 1979, and even then it was under the pseudonym of Richard Bachman. And King's Bachman books are especially dark and nihilistic even by his standards. Yes, even from someone that wrote Pet Sematary. And it's been a good year for Stephen King adaptations, still a booming business after it. We've had the gleefully twisted The Monkey, The Life of Chuck, The Institute on TV, and later this year we've got another Bachman book, The Running Man, getting readapted by Edgar Wright, in a version that's presumably going to be a lot more faithful than the previous film. Sorry, Arnie, but I'm pretty stoked for that. The Long Walk has had itself a long road to film. Various parties, including Shawshank Redemption's Frank Darabont, have tried for decades to bring it to the screen. It now finally arrives directed by Francis Lawrence, who has had plenty of experience with dystopian sci-fi, having helmed the Hunger Games sequels and prequel, and the script is adapted by J.T. Molnar, who made a splash with the twisty horror thriller Strange Darling. King also did have some involvement with the film and approved not just the cast, but also the changes the film makes. More on some of that stuff later, but perhaps the reason it has taken so long to be turned into a film, when adaptations of King's work are just as prolific as his own writing, is that the premise is a tricky one to make cinematic. I will fully admit that when I first saw a trailer, I too was sceptical as to whether it would be able to translate well into a movie, and I'm glad to admit I was wrong. The Long Walk doesn't just work, it does so well that it joins the ranks of some of the best adaptations of Stephen King's work on film. Perhaps one of the reasons why The Long Walk is a challenging story to adapt is that it's fundamentally an allegory for the Vietnam War, and it will always be at the core of the text. The visual of young men being marched towards their cruel, senseless death at the hands of a brutal, inhumane military-industrial complex is utterly unmistakable. Whatever their reasons for joining the army, the walk, they won't matter. Their dreams or ambitions for their futures, like Jordan Gonzalez's Richard Harkness, an aspiring writer with something of a resemblance to King, will be snuffed out indiscriminately and forgotten in the face of their demise. There is no time to stop, to reflect, to mourn, or to do anything but keep moving forward and on to the next victim, and the next, and the one after that. Plans, hopes, ambitions are gone in the most barbaric fashion possible. They're 1 minute, gone the next. Maybe the allegory isn't actually so much the problem, because unfortunately it keeps being all too relevant. I do think the reason why The Long Walk has gone the distance all these years is that the allegory is malleable and can be read and interpreted in different ways. The dystopian American setting, for instance, is especially potent at our current tumultuous political moment. The film version plays upon this further by implying that it's partially the product of civil war that has led to a major economic downturn, and further amplifies the source's critique of America. Part of the reason for The Long Walk is that it's meant to serve as a sick inspiration for the people, claiming it boosts the country's GDP, grinding up young men in the gears of capitalism like a ritualistic sacrifice. In that sense, the film does have echoes of something like The Purge in its political critique of a nation banding around a callous tradition. Despite the claims of the Major, though, the sites the boys march through on their walk largely go through areas showing stark deprivation and hardship, and dead-end, empty towns. This is an America under a state of decay under totalitarianism, and the participants mostly signed up for the prize to try and escape their dreary circumstances. They'll soon find out that prosperity is not on the menu. But you could also interpret it on a much more existential level, and at times I thought about the long walk as being a metaphor for life, that you're constantly moving forward, and as you do, you gradually lose those around you. To compete in the walk means having to accept the certainty of death, as we all do in life, and having to understand that fact. They don't know how far they'll get before they're struck down by injury, misfortune, or just plain exhaustion. The boys walk in the shadow of death, and every moment could be their last. As the boys discuss amongst themselves at several points, if they are going to go, it's better to go out on their own terms, usually as a deliberate act of rebellion and insubordination, rather than obeying the rules of a cruel game stacked against their favour from the outset. That counts as a minor victory. Even just choosing to simply sit down becomes a decision to confront their fate with a dignified acceptance rather than agonising pain. There's a nobility in that. And Lawrence puts the horror of the situation directly at the forefront, and the unfortunate first elimination, played by Jojo Rabbit's Roman Griffin Davis, shown a graphic close-up for maximum shock effect. The title doesn't appear until directly after this moment, and it sets the grim tone for what is to come. The walk is violent as ceremonial spectacle broadcast across the country, much like the war reports on the news. It's an idea that King has come back to. Hello again, the running man. But it means the film has to, tread carefully when it comes to depicting the viciousness. This is a horror film after all, and there are the expected moments of gore, including a particularly grisly moment involving a tank, or some gnarly injuries as the miles accumulate on ankles twisted at unfortunate angles. But these are exceptions rather than the norm. Instead, when one of the boys gets their ticket punched, as the Major euphemistically calls it, it's often represented by the sound of a gunshot loudly ringing in the air and the hard final silence that follows. And usually the elimination is in the distance at the back of the frame, and a few very minor characters are simply heard off screen. I hope I never get used to that, Ray and McVrees agree amongst themselves, and thanks to the film's effectiveness, the audience never does either. The violence is largely staged with discretion rather than trying to sensationalise every fatality, which would have quickly blunted their impact in repetition. You make the first shot linger and disturb so that the audience thinks of it every time they hear that sound onwards. You don't need to keep on showing it because the mind is doing the work. And yet somehow, despite all the horror, there's a lot of humanity to be found amongst the film, and that's because of the extremely talented cast of young actors. Even in the supporting cast, they managed to make these characters distinctive and stand out. There's a natural camaraderie that develops among the boys that becomes a solidarity as their numbers narrow. They start referring to themselves as the Musketeers in a valiant attempt to try and work together for as long as they can. And despite knowing that they shouldn't because of exactly the kind of game they're in, they can't help but form the kind of bond that is forged by spending every moment together in tense circumstances, the kind of young brashness mixed with gallows humour, not to mention intimate. The walk stops for nothing and no one. They have to sleep while walking, which Ray is astonished to find that his body can somehow do, but that also includes toilet breaks, so they have to somehow find a way to do their business, yes, even number twos, on the move without stopping for too long. There is one memorably unfortunate sod with an upset stomach. The walk is a messy business in every sense. But that spirit and that humour isn't just a welcome respite for them, it's one for the audience as well. I think it would have been very easy for The Long Walk to become a grim trudge, just a succession of kids getting their ticket. Instead, it makes you care about the characters, and you find yourself rooting for them despite knowing the odds. The film was actually shot in sequence, so you can almost see the real-life friendships among the actors developing through the film, and it enhances their characterizations and performances. It becomes genuinely heartbreaking when they reach their last mile. There's an emotional weight to them, and you start to feel their absence. As the body count gets ever larger, you start to feel the mounting toll and weariness on the survivors. Among some of the most memorable members in the supporting cast are Ben Wang, recently seen in Karate Kid Legends as the gum-chewing Hank Olsen, Joshua Ojic as Collie, and especially Charlie Plummer as Barkovich. Barkovich is easily the most antagonistic of the boys, whose gloating and bullying quickly makes him unpopular and ostracised amongst them. But underneath that is a frightened kid who desperately wants to be liked and validated, and Plummer's twitchy turn gives an unsympathetic character some nuance. In the lead as Ray is Cooper Hoffman, who is the son of Philip Seymour Hoffman, something which the actor has admitted influenced his performance playing a character who has lost his father, and Ray's motivations for joining are greatly expanded upon in the film version. Judy Greer appears in a handful of key scenes playing Ray's mother, who is utterly distraught at having her son compete in the walk, having already lost her husband, and now facing the likelihood she may also lose her son as well, and that's a grief that is just too terrible to even think about. It's also worth noting that, again, like Licorice Pizza and Paul Thomas Anderson previously, Hoffman is working with a director who previously worked with his father, as Lawrence directed him in the aforementioned Hunger Games films. But Hoffman is a solid actor in his own right, and he gives Ray a sensitive everyman quality, as he's particularly shaken by the mounting losses, and his resolve that the walk is a cruel spectacle grows with each passing mile. Ray tries to rally and lead the group and help them as they struggle, but sometimes that's not enough, and the results often leave him shaken and shell-shocked. But the real standout of the long walk is David Johnson as the scarred McVrees, who admits he spent much of his life on the road already, and yet in spite of that he remains the most upbeat, positive member, and Johnson is already a rising star. He was great in Rye Lane, and his standout role in Alien Romulus put him on a lot of people's radars. His performance in this confirms him as a star. He has an immense charisma about him. You can hardly keep your eyes off of him throughout the entire film. He's absolutely magnetic. He makes for an excellent double act with Hoffman, as Ray and McVrees become fast friends early on, just as the actors have in real life. When Ray begins to spiral, McVrees is the one pulling him out, telling him to take it moment by moment. If the dynamic between the boys sometimes recalls Stand By Me, then the relationship between the two is reminiscent of Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman in The Shawshank Redemption, and the kinship and solidarity that comes from keeping hope in the most dire of circumstances, albeit with far less redemption in the end. And it is worth noting that JT Molyneux's script does make fairly substantial changes to the source material, which is not uncommon to bringing King's work to the screen. Some alterations are also to wrongfoot those who have read the book and playing with the expectations of those already familiar with it, not just new audiences. So some characters are less prominent in the film than they are in the book, and vice versa, and some of the dynamics between the characters are altered and reversed. I suspect some of these changes might divide readers of the book, particularly a different ending. The way the original King book ended was on a bleak but somewhat ambiguous note that's open to interpretation. The film's ending is equally grim but in its own way, and does provide a facile sense of catharsis on a surface level, but still ends on a defeated note. There's arguments for both endings, but I think both work towards the same message about the effect that violence, and war, don't forget, has on the mind, and the emptiness of it all, ultimately. But yeah, I really enjoyed The Long Walk, if that is really the right word for it. It's a tough watch to be sure, but it shouldn't be anything less than that. It's very well directed and fantastic performances throughout from the entire cast. I do wish that we got slightly more of Mark Hamill's The Major, a regular of King adaptations and only very recently seen in The Life of Chuck. Hamill's Major is more of a figure than a character, Uncle Sam by way of a drill sergeant who never takes off his sunglasses, who largely watches over the proceedings from the back of a jeep. When the boys try to cuss him out, he just smiles right back gloatingly, while periodically giving macho encouragement, like just how much balls it takes to get this far on the walk. Regardless, I left The Long Walk somewhat shell-shocked myself, and I think it ranks among some of the very best Stephen King adaptations on film, which is pretty high praise given the calibre of some of those movies. King films tend to either be great or terrible, there's very few that fall in between, and as I walked home I couldn't stop thinking about it, with the sound of gunfights still ringing in my ears long after it had ended. If you like this review and you want to support my work, you can give me a tip at my Ko-fi page or YouTube's Super Thanks feature, which is right below the video. Or you can help me keep pace over on my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can also join YouTube memberships for similar perks. Or you can just simply like, share, subscribe, hype the video, it all helps. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.